Hunt with passion. Never stop casting. Chase the dream. Welcome to Season 3 of Musky Mastery Outdoors, sponsored by Joe Bucher Outdoors, #1 in big game fish products.
All right, guys, welcome to our 6th vlog in the Season 3 series here. And guys, I say this a lot, but I could not be more excited about this vlog in particular because we are going to be talking about my #1 producer of numbers of muskies. Now, we already talked about the 700 Buchertail, how it has produced some of my largest, actually, in fact, my largest muskies to date in the state of Wisconsin. But today, we are talking about the lure that is responsible for putting more muskies in my boat for myself and clients combined than any other lure. It is just unbelievable, the 500 Series Buchertail. It comes in the Tinsel model, it comes in the Bucktail model, and it is just like the #1 producer. So for this vlog, let me start off with telling you the story of kind of how this new and fine-tuned Buchertail Tinsel and now the entire 500 Buchertail lineup came to be. And it really, it rolls the, tapes back all the way to 2013. That's the year that I hooked up with Joe. I was originally started out just as a videographer. I was behind the scenes. I got to take a couple casts. And, I made it on the show every once in a while back then. But, I was guiding quite a bit, as I still do now. And I came to Joe and I said, hey, man, dude. I said, Joe, I really need a Buchertail 500, but I need it built just a little bit differently. I need it to be heavier. I said, I got these clients. I got a bite going. In particular, at that time, in 2013, I had this pink bite that I nicknamed Elton John. I love Elton John as a musician too. But I had this pink bite going. I said, Joe, I got to have a Buchertail that's a little heavier. I got these customers. They're great clients of mine, but they just can't seem to throw the smaller blades, the smaller bucktails, with any precision. They can't get the casting distance with them. So I needed some weight, and I needed it to be on a beefed up profile. I said, hey, Joe, can you maybe build me a 500 that's built out of a heavier gauge wire? And of course, I had to kind of do a little extra organizing work for Joe. Putting the cameras away, organizing the garage a little bit better. And not too many days later, Joe was so kind to have made 2 custom 500 Series Buchertail Tinsels in pink. And it was actually kind of funny. One of the behind the scenes stories that some of you clients out there might know is that the original ones, which have been since retired, although I could probably use them, but they're retired just for sentimental reasons, the blade was painted with my mom's nail polish. And to get that pink color, at that time, we didn't have a pink blade, and I just decided I took the orange blade and we painted it pink. And I don't know if it was that shade of pink, but boy, that year, 2013, was like the year of Elton John. The 500 Series Buchertail was, it just from there on, it has been just a downhill, complete, just utter obliteration of muskies. Now, that's probably an exaggeration, but still, it feels like it. We've caught so many muskies on this darn lure. So this vlog is really dedicated to the 500. I want to talk about, my classic things as, when, why, how, the technique, the equipment I'm using. And again, just to lay the picture here before we roll some quality content for you, the significance of this is that, again, here's a lure that produces more muskies for me. We all want to catch more muskies. This lure produces more muskies for me and my clients than any other rule. In fact, it's a rule in my boat that someone must be throwing a 500, usually it's Goldie, a 500 at all times. And again, this is where I'm at, and I want to roll some footage now. You're going to see a video segment here. This is actually episode #1 of the Season 3 Musky Mastery show here, and this is a big muskie that hit in early June. Everybody here knows 2019 was a super slow year, for the most part early, because it was so cold, and it really took some rethinking and some dedication to get these big muskies to hit. And here's one of them that ate a 500 Series Buchertail Tinsel in Goldilocks pattern in the figure 8. Check this out, and then we're going to go into the details on what led to this catch.
finally, that one coming. Oh, it's a good fish. Stay hooked. Oh, shoot. Oh. Fish hooked. It's a big one. Oh, we got it. Yes. Touchdown. Big fish. All right. That was amazing. Wow. Right on the major period. All right, man. Look at the size of that fish, guys. Holy cow. Northwoods bruiser taken during a cold front. Man, that is an awesome fish, guys. In the figure 8 on Goldilocks. Wow. That is a brute. All right, let's get her back. Holy cow.
Talk about a killer muskie, clear water, early season, cold water temps, and a tough bite. I mean, it was not easy. By the way, before we start our kind of analysis, the big fish analysis here in the vlog, check this out. You know, I'm a high school teacher, so we had to get a whiteboard. I've got, of course, a plethora of colored markers here. So when we feel it come on, we're going to get into the teaching kind of vibe here and maybe draw some things out. And I thought you guys would appreciate that. I've always wanted a whiteboard, and I think this will be really cool. So laying the kind of the foundation here on this story, you guys just saw it. Early June in 2019 it was cold. I mean, we just, for whatever reasons, environmentally, it was a cold spring. Water temps did not approach true 70 degrees on the surface till close to 4th of July. I mean, it was just a cold season. And although, you know, muskies were still reproducing up until and into July, in some cases on some super big lakes, you could still find lakes where muskies were done reproducing and they were in the recuperation stage and they were in that feeding stage. But still, even fishing small lakes and really, you know, being strategic in where I went, it was tough to get them to bite. And so here's a scenario where I'm focusing on brown tobacco cabbage. And that's actually why I went to that particular lake, is because it had such an abundance of brown tobacco cabbage. And, you know, again, that's one of the, why white tobacco cabbage? It's super dark in color. A lot of folks that I've guided over the years, and I was like this when I was younger, they think it's dead. It's not. That's just the natural color of that weed, and it absorbs the sun's rays. It really heats up everything. And, you know, as I was scouting areas to fish, of course, that's the North Bay, the northernmost water in that particular system I was fishing. And it was a couple degrees warmer than anywhere else in that whole lake. So that's why I was in that particular spot. And of course, with the bite being slow, what lure am I throwing? The 500 Series Buchertail Tinsel. And we're going to go into, you know, a lot of detail about the lure as we go along. But that's, you know, one of the basic reasons I'm going to talk about why I throw this lure. When the conditions suck, let's face it, when the conditions are tough, when muskies aren't biting and following like we want them to, I simply downsize and throw something smaller. So that is why I'm throwing that 500 series here. And then, of course, this musky segment just unravels as it should under any tough bite. It seems the muskie doesn't pound it out there all aggressive. She follows it. That was all I was able to get this fish to do. This big fish comes cruising, and my audio is pretty poor. I didn't have my head cam at that time. You know, I said, okay, here she comes. She comes right into that figure 8, and then she kind of stops. And this is perhaps one of the coolest ways, I think, to catch muskies. Not only in the figure 8, that's awesome, but this particular fish, does this thing where, I'm going to use the dry erase board here. Let's see how this works. Muskie's coming in on the figure 8 and stops right here. They kind of sit there. Here's the boat, okay? And what I do then is Muskie's coming in, I take my Buchertail 500 and I swing it around. You'll see me as I replay it here. I'm going to replay this. You see me swing it around her head real slow, almost in slow motion. And sure enough, and I've seen this happen a lot of times when these muskies do that. They come in here. This is the muskie. It's kind of cool having the whiteboard. And this is the path of the lure coming in. And she kind of stops right about here, take it over her head, and bam, she hits it. All hell breaks loose. That's when the big 9-foot Legend Elite kicks in. Got to have the long rod to battle these fish. You know, the muskie ended up turning out to be a little bit better hooked than I thought, but still, it's nerve-wracking when you got a big fish. It was early in the season, so especially early when you haven't had a lot of big ones in the net yet, they all, you know, they're all valuable, but that's when they're really like, oh boy, let's get this fish in here. So that was the scenario. Early season, got a big fish to commit. It was in the figure 8. And again, the keys here are the northmost, section of this lake, warmest water, tobacco cabbage, and downsizing. That's where that 500 series really comes into play. It just, whatever it is, using a smaller profile lure somehow triggers muskies into moving. Smaller presentations, whatever that might, do for the psychology of a muskie, when they want to, it probably has something to do with not having to expend as much energy to chase down and fight bigger predators, bigger prey, I should say. The predators don't want to expend as much energy eating and chasing and killing something big. So I would have to believe that it's something to do with smaller prey items are easier to eat, expend less energy, and overall, it's just easier to do. So let's break this down now. And why throw the 500? And I'm going to go over a couple of these things now that we've already talked about. But hey, it's my most consistent producer of numbers of muskies, including some big ones. And I'm going to talk about my top reasons why I throw this lure. And we'll start right off there. And again, it's a rule in guiding, and that I can't say that enough. I mean, when people, and I'm very gracious to be in this position, believe me, I've worked very hard. I'm very, very, very proud of being a guide that people call up to take them on a trip. That really, it means a lot to me. And, but what I'm getting at here is there's a lot on the line. Somebody's paying me good money, and my expertise in what to throw and where to go, I mean, that's what people are looking for, besides hopefully having a good time and having a guy that talks all the time. But, it's a rule in my boat as a guide. Someone has got to be throwing the 500. And the reason for it is because if you're not, it's not really even a joke. You're losing fish. That lure pulls more muskies than any other darn lure I've got, and it's a rule. Okay. Secondly, when the muskie movement is slow, we talked about this as we broke down the big fish catch. When muskies just aren't moving, whether that's environmentally triggered, if you've got a cold front, if you've got really stagnant hot weather, or if you've got fishing pressure, boating pressure, if you've got a lot of people keeping that bite down, that is when I'm going to choose the 500 series. It's a smaller, downsized presentation, and that's what I'm talking about. It gets muskies to move when they're either pressured from fishermen, from people, or from the environment. Secondly, I should say third now, I use the 500 series as a castback lure. And this is another usage of this term we call downsizing. And again, downsizing simply means you're going from a larger musky lure to a smaller musky lure. So an example of that would be going from a 700 Buchertail to a 500, or from an 800 to a 500. That's the idea. And what I'm talking about when I'm discussing this castback scenario is a lot of times, if I'm throwing the 700, or let's say for an example, I had a lot of good content coming up on this season and in previous seasons of my show. If I'm throwing a double 800, it's a bigger presentation, and I've got a muskie that cruises in on that double 8 and comes into that figure 8 for a turn and then just darts off. Maybe we see her on the side imaging, whatever, but she doesn't commit. And you can tell by watching these muskies come in, if they've got kind of a little bit of fire in their eyes, they become a perfect candidate for a castback downsizer. When a muskie follows in a larger presentation, drop down in size, and that's when I'm really kicking butt with that 500. If I'm not already throwing it because I feel like conditions are poor in general or muskies are not moving, I will switch to it when I've got a fish that won't commit to a larger lure. And the fourth reason here of why and when to throw the 500 series is for endurance fishing. Let's say I'm on one of these musky hunts that's 16 hours long. Well, let me tell you, and you guys and gals know out there, when you're 10 hours in, and 10 hours is a long day, you get fatigued. Even when you're lifting weights, even when you're doing this every day, it can be tiring on the body. So the 500 series is a great lure to be throwing when you're tired and you stay in the game because it's easy to throw. And for an aging population of musky anglers out there, and there's nothing to be ashamed of with that at all. That's an awesome thing that a lot of folks now are getting a little older in age and still love to fish muskies. But sometimes these folks, and I guide them all the time, they feel sometimes limited in what they can throw. The 500 series keeps folks in the game. My good friend Joe Bucher has talked about this numerous times. When he had a shoulder injury a number of years ago, that 500 series kept him in the game, and it kept us on big fish. And that's another thing that I'll mention over and over on this vlog is that, and I should have mentioned this in the story section, so I'm going back here. I'm going to talk about the significance part of the 500 here as a side note. When Joe and I initially were kind of retooling this 500 series and really looking at it very seriously, it was producing lots and lots of fish for us in Wisconsin. But there was a general mindset, and I was very guilty of this too, that when we went on our big Canadian filming trip, that the 500 series just wasn't going to cut it. It was too small, and this was our mentality, that it was too small, it was going to get eaten by pike, and we were going to get your hands cut up, and it was just going to be a bad deal. Well, we couldn't have been further from the truth. Oh my gosh. Now you look at the Fishing with Joe Bucher YouTube series and you see the 500 series pulling in giants of all kind in Wisconsin, but really so in Canada. Boy, it produces big muskies in Canada. And the trick was always this, and it still is, no matter where you fish. If you throw a small muskie lure in an area that's loaded up with pike, you're going to catch pike. If you throw a smaller size musky lure on a spot that has big muskies holding on it, you've got a shot at catching big muskies because the big muskies will eat small presentations under the right conditions. Okay, now we'll talk when. When do you throw the 500 series? Okay, well, the most classical thing I will tell you that really where it gets a lot of time for me is early in the season. That was the opening video segment that I chose for this vlog. Early in the season, it's colder water temperatures. I have found, generally speaking, that in cooler water temperatures, smaller presentations, generally speaking, this is a generalization, but smaller presentations generally produce better in cooler water time periods. So that early spring, early summer, when I'm talking the opener in May, all the way up through the end of June, that's when the 500 series is absolutely deadly. But again, I have fished this lure with success from ice out, or I should say just from Memorial Day weekend for me in northern Wisconsin when the season opens, all the way until the end of November when the lakes freeze up. The 500 series is at home throughout the entire season. And there are certain lakes I have found. It's really interesting talking to folks. We fish a lot of the similar waters, either various guides or buddies of mine, that we find that certain lakes, they just eat 500s. They won't eat 700s. They won't eat 800s. They eat 500s. So there are some lakes where they just seem to like that style lure. And again, it just varies. It varies. But again, early season is probably when I throw it. Okay, now we're going to talk where. And this is really, I don't want to be too open-ended on this, but the 500 really, it produces muskies for me in all different types of scenarios. And that's one of the beauties of throwing a blade in general. Now, given, when I'm talking weed cover here, the weeds, there's a fine line where if the cover's too thick, I won't throw it. I'll opt for a slot master or a top raider. But weed cover, absolutely. Rock cover, very, very underutilized in the world of blades, generally speaking, from what I've seen. Blades, the 500 series over rocks, man, I've caught some of my best muskies in the 500, slow rolled over rocks. And of course, suspended fishing, fishing around wood cover. I mean, there's really no place within reason that you can't fish that 500 series. Now, I'll show you a couple things on the dry erase board that I'm talking about here. As far as fishing weed cover, we're talking where now, okay? Let's say I've got a weed flat, okay? It kind of looks like this, okay? And this is the weed edge. There we go, weed edge. Here's the shoreline, okay? And here is my boat. Something like that, okay? So, how am I fishing the 500 Series Buchertail on a weed flat? Well, generally speaking, I'm doing two things, and I'm doing them kind of simultaneously, especially if I'm by myself. What I'm going to be doing is casting where we'd say this is a perpendicular cast. It's 90 degrees with the weed edge. And this is a big flat. There's cabbage, let's say, all over the place in here. I'm casting a lot of times just right into that flat and burning it right back, right over the tops of the weeds. And I'm also making sure, and this is very generalized, but I just want to show you when I'm talking weed cover, I'm also casting ahead of the boat and fishing parallel. So we've got two different types of casts taking place with the 500 series over weed cover. Parallel here, and perpendicular here. And that's generally, and then of course you can see here I've got, maybe some kind of point here. Here's an inside turn. These are all areas I'm looking to hold muskies. But I just wanted to point that out when I'm fishing this over weed cover, I'm always making sure to cast not just perpendicular, not just like this, but I'm casting parallel. I'm taking these, we call these test casts. And if I see a muskie on my side imaging out here, I'm going to take a cast right out here. You've seen me do that. It's incredible, and we've got more episodes coming up like that. Now, how about rock humps? Same general principle applies when it comes to parallel and perpendicular casting. I want to kind of give you guys here a little bit of a visual when I'm talking rocks. Here, maybe we'll get out the purple marker here for the rock reef. Let's say we've got some kind of rock reef, and let's say our top out here, let's say that this is 10 foot, okay? And we could be in 20 feet of water, something like that. Here's 20 feet. And so my boat in this case is going to be up here, okay? When you're casting over a rock reef, generally speaking, I got a lot going on here with my board, but I think this is cool. Hopefully you guys enjoy this. Please leave a comment if you like this. What I'm doing here is I'm casting the 500 series over a rock reef. Okay, here's the rocks, here's big boulders, stuff like that, and there's a fish crib here. Casting it out, okay, so you're gonna lob a big long cast here, and instead of cranking it straight in fast, like I would over a weed flat, where I'm really trying to keep it above the cover so it doesn't get snagged, here, I'm really gonna slow things down and slow roll it, because and again, all that entails is just cranking it slower. Cast it out, engage, get that blade spinning. You can still burst it to get that blade going, and then just slow her on down. And what you're going to do is create much more of a C shape in the presentation, and that is going to get you closer to big dog, because big dog is likely, not all the time, but big dog, muskie, there's my square muskie, big dog's sitting here, and the closer you get to big dog's face, the better. Sometimes muskies are just chasing blades, so I always try to mix it up and get a blade over rock structure. And sometimes when rock structures are shallower in nature, let's say, between 1 and 5 feet, they become really, really, really strong candidates for the 500 series Buchertail. So especially on shallower rock reefs, but they don't need to be shallow. But generally speaking, when I am throwing them on rocks, that's where. Now, let's talk technique. We have discussed Bucktail Technique in the past, but we'll go over it again. Generally speaking, with a blade like the 500, we are using this, you've seen, I mean, years ago, Joe and I have done these run and gun shows when, the name is there in and of itself. You're running a gun and you're covering water quickly. You're trying to cover water efficiently. And I'm trying to cover water. And a lot of times, whether it's rocks or weeds, I'm generally taking a pretty long cast. I bound it on out there. And the idea being that you're trying to cover water, you're trying to locate muskies with this lure and trigger a muskie, if not striking way out on the end of a cast, striking in the figure eight. But again, it's a long bomb cast, and one of the biggest things I want to talk about as far as technique, the fancy term, it's a word that's way too big in the sport of musky fishing because we don't want to make things too complicated. It's already complicated enough to catch these fish, is synchronization. And what synchronization is it's this timing thing where you're releasing the pressure of the lure, you're releasing the pressure of your thumb on the spool, I should say, as the lure is flying out. And before the lure hits the water, synchronization is this fancy, you can tell I'm a teacher because I can hold 4 markers in my hand at once and pick the color I want. Synchronization is this fancy term that really describes this timing and process of thumbing the spool. So you're literally stopping the lure midair right before it hits the water and cranking as the lure kind of makes its kind of dive and breaks into the water surface. Synchronization, what that's going to do is allow you to get that blade moving right away, which is very important, and really stop from snagging on whatever type of structure you're fishing around as the lure. If you didn't synchronize properly, a lot of folks will cast it out, kaplunk, okay, engage the reel. And what's happening is if you're not synchronizing properly, the 500 is falling into the drink on the end of your cast, and you wait till you hear the splash and you start cranking. Well, by the time you start cranking, getting that blade going, if you're fishing over shallow weed cover, for example, you're going to get all snagged up and it's going to be a fouled cast. So properly synchronizing is really important. 2, speed control. Speed control. I was just talking to my good friend Stephen Paul on one of our last podcasts on the Musky 360 app about speed. Well, scoring with the 500 series is as big about speed as it really is anything. Again, going back to the opening muskie clip, generally speaking, when the water's cold, go slow. And that's one of the biggest things with any of these lures. I talked about, fishing blades throughout last season in the fall with success, and folks were looking at me like, oh my God, how are you catching muskies on a blade? Just slow it down and they'll eat it. So going slow and knowing when to go slow, again, we're talking over a rock reef, slow it down. If you're over, thick weed cover and you've got a small amount of space between the top of the weed and the surface of the water, speed it up. If you've got a muskie chasing it in and it looks like it's snaking back and forth and it's getting aggressive, speed it up. Get that muskie to commit. If you've got a muskie that starts tapering off on a follow, it depends. You might want to slow it down. And then that brings us right into the figure eight. Before I get into that, I saw one of my notes here. I've talked about slowing it down when you get cold water, burning it when it gets a little warmer, depending on the mood of the muskie. Sometimes speed is something, I guess I'll just say this, it's something that you want to experiment with. Clients ask me all the time, how fast should I reel this in? And my general answer, and I'm not trying to be a jerk, I'm just saying, I don't know. I don't know until you catch a muskie on that lure. I do not know what they want today because today's a new day. It is different than yesterday. I'm going to tell you what we did yesterday and how I've been catching them, but until we catch one, I don't know. So being adaptive with your speed of the retrieve is very important. Are you bursting it when you bring it in, or are you just doing the same thing the entire time? I would encourage you to try bursting the 500. Change the speed throughout the entirety of a single cast to trigger. We're talking about here the difference between, look at it like this, right? Generally speaking, what's happening with a blade bait? Well, a blade bait, you're not changing anything with, generally speaking, the track of the lure. A crankbait takes a C track. That's a crankbait, okay? A blade, generally speaking, takes more of a straight line path. It probably curves a little bit, obviously, but it's a straight line. And so when you've got, there's really no deviation here. Even here, there's not as much of a deviation. You know, you would take like something like a JB Rattler would be a great example of a lure that you can really, really mix things up. You can let it drop, you know, crank, drop, crank, drop, crank, drop. You know, you can really mix up something like that. When you're working with a blade bait that comes in on this red line on a straight line, changing the speed is super important and very much underrated for how to use these types of lures consistently. Or you know, with consistency, I should say, in catching muskies. And the third thing on technique that I want to talk about is the figure eight. You saw it again, referring to that opening video clip. Speed, 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 speed change. Everybody knows that you want to make big, wide figure eights. That's why, you know, I can throw the equipment right in there, you know, at this point. 8'6" to a 9-foot rod, medium heavy power, fast action. My all-time favorite bucktail rod, hands down. It's in like every one of my episodes now. LEM 90MHF. That's the Legend Elite Musky rod, 9-foot, medium heavy power, fast action. That rod's unbelievable. You can make giant figure eights with a 9-footer. You can sling it and cast it out a country mile. But one thing again that I'm getting at in this talk about the 500 and what makes it so effective, you know, a lot of that falls in the angler too. You've got to be able to change the speed, read the mood of the muskie, but just in general, change the speed of your figure eight. And I'll give a quick demonstration of that. Well, I've got this whiteboard, seems to be coming in handy, very much so here in our conversation. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this. What I mean by changing the speed in the figure eight, you know, let's do a little figure eight here. And let's say the lure enters from here, okay? When I'm entering the figure eight here, I'm just gonna mark this red for burst. I am, you know, when I come into that figure eight, generally speaking, I am going to speed up into that first turn and be fairly aggressive with it. Not overkill, but I'm gonna be aggressive with it. And as I enter the turns, I'm using a blue here to show a cooler speed. I'm slowing down a little bit on that turn. You've got big muskies in the figure eight. A big fish does not turn on a dime. You got to slow down a little bit. And then change gears, speed it up. You get to that turn, slow it down a little bit. Now this is a generalization. You don't need to do this every single time. You could keep it slow through the middle here, but that's the general idea when we're talking figure eight, speeding up, slowing down, changing gears, trying to trigger a strike with speed. Speed and blades, speed control and blades, and then also, of course, we're talking, we've got width here, but don't forget about your vertical height, your change. You went up, down, that's where the long rod is going to help out a ton. Last thing, it's a long vlog here, but hopefully you guys are enjoying this stuff. Last thing I'll talk about with the 500 are modifications, and I would say the biggest, and I get super enthusiastic about this, the biggest modification that I make with my 500 Series Buchertails is adding, now again, I'm always careful to say this, the stock hook that comes in that package is fine. That's a great hook. But the hook that I like to put on there varies quite a bit. And I generally have gone with a rule. It's you know, the bigger the hook that you can hide in a lure, generally speaking, the better. Especially when you're fishing Canadian waters or you're on bodies of water, wherever you fish in Ohio, Minnesota, Wisconsin, whatever it is, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Kentucky, I mean, you name it. The bigger the muskies in the water, I really try to go with a big dog hook. And I have found that 5/0 size treble hooks and 6/0 size, you can even fit a 6. Not in the buck hair Buchertail 500s, but in the tinsels. The tinsels really in the water, that tinsel really flares out, and you can fit a much larger treble hook under that tinsel than you would believe. And I'm a big fan of the short shank. Got to keep it nice and short in there. Wide gap. A wide gap. What I'm talking about here, again, we're talking treble hook, is here's the treble, here's the shank of the treble, here's the hook. I'm talking we want short length here, and we want wide. This is the width, wide between the hook and the shank. I'm going to put W there for width. I want a wide gap. Wider gap, why so? Because I think as a muskie gets bigger, you look at this jawbone of this fish, the wider the gap, the easier that hook can fit around the jaw of that muskie. That's one of the things that I'm thinking. And the other thing that I do with my 500s, and it just depends. Sometimes I get on a kick with this, and sometimes I'm getting on a kick because I'm catching fish on it, as I'm putting a little, a little grub on the end, and I'll mix up the colors. It doesn't matter what it is, a paddle tail, a Magambo, whatever you got. I'll put a grub on the end to increase the size of that 500. It almost makes it look like a 600 size or a 700 size, even though it's really got the 500 size blade. So guys, it looks like we're probably at the 30-some minute mark here, and there's so much to talk about with the 500 Series Buchertail. I can't cover it all. I mean, I could talk to you guys for hours, literally hours, about this lure. Why? Well, because I've caught so many darn fish on it. My clients have caught so many darn fish in this thing. You've seen Joe Bucher catch fish on this thing. It catches muskies, and it does it consistently for me. I told you, it's a rule in my guide boat. The 500 Series Buchertail must be out at all times if we've got multiple people casting. And, and it's not just small muskies. Small lures can produce giant muskies. I've got a couple here that I haven't released yet for my season 3 episodes that really showcase just how big of a muskie will eat a 500 Series Buchertail. Guys, I really hope you've enjoyed this segment. I have. I hope you can notice how fired up I am about this whole thing. I love this lure. It's a standby for me. It is an all-time classic. If you don't have one, please do yourself a favor for the 2020 season and put one of these in your tackle box. You will not be disappointed, and I guarantee if you do, you'll be sending me a picture pretty early on in your season of a nice muskie that hammered one of them. Guys, I cannot thank you enough for all of your support, for your comments, for all of the wonderful things you have to say, all the amazing constructive criticism you have. Please keep it coming. We've got a lot more vlog content on the way. Stay safe, stay healthy out there with all this this coronavirus stuff going around. Please keep your family safe. I wish you all the best, and thanks, as always, for watching. Hope you enjoyed this one.